No question about it. There's nobody more committed in this presidential fight than the vice president herself.
Julia Abad is a public policy expert and a woman who wears many hats. In 2010, she became the youngest cabinet member of then President Benigno Aquino III. In this episode, she shares with us the greatest lessons she's learned from her government work in advocacies and why she believes that in the 2022 presidential election, a single mother like her will prevail. Kamusta po kayo? What's keeping you busy these days?
I handle a couple of projects now. Since I left government, I'm working on a workplace gender equality project, which is funded by the Australian government. I'm running the FEU Public Policy Center now. I sit on a couple of boards. I'm an advisor for the Philippine Business for Education. And I'm also a trustee of Cagayan de Oro Colleges and Araujo University, which are FINMA schools.
Since we just came off of Women's Month, I guess a lot of our audience are wondering, as a multi-hyphenate yourself, how do you manage to juggle all those responsibilities and still come out successful?
Well, I hope I come out successful. I don't know. That's probably not for me to judge. One of the things that helps me, and this is actually part of the advocacy I work for, is I am fortunate enough to be able to curate my hours. I'm a single working mom. I have a 10-year-old daughter. They're doing hybrid school. So last week she was in school, pero this week online siya. So one of the things that really keeps me busy is making sure that she's actually in class. She's not watching Netflix on another tab, helping her with her homework. It's also tough for kids, di ba? She wasn't seeing her friends for a while. So, syempre, ako lang yung friend niya. So, you have to be there to talk to them. How was your day? What happened? More than work, that's what keeps me busy. But the ability to also decide for myself what I'm gonna do today, what I will focus on, when I'm gonna go to the office, when I'll stay home and do some writing works. The freedom to do that, the flexibility to do that has really allowed me to maximize my hours.
That is very nice to hear, ma'am. No? And also very inspiring as well, especially for a lot of millennials who are having troubles juggling so many responsibilities amidst the pandemic. You have a very impressive resume. You worked in the government for a very long time. You were an executive assistant to the SWD. You were also a senior staffer to the Philippine Senate. And starting in 2010, you were the youngest member of Pinoy's cabinet. We are curious to know what were your fondest memories of working with Pinoy?
Actually, it's the same stories that we exchange, nung napagalitan kami. We stayed up all night in the office to finish this and that. There are a lot of small, interesting stories. But I guess for me, as I was the youngest member of Pinoy's team at that time, if there's anything that President Aquino should be given credit for, it was really his ability to bring together a group of real experts, the best and the brightest in their fields. Every day was like a starstruck day because I got to work with, the brightest ambassadors, some really excellent private sector people who decided to join government, some very fierce, impressive women. That's really what was most unforgettable, to hear their take on pressing issues, but also on everyday things. It was the team that I worked with. They were the experience that I would not forget.
People of my generation, millennials, we came of age during the Aquino administration. What is your advice to young people who want to take their careers in the government?
Working in government is tough. I was talking to someone last week. She said, "Oh, you used to work pala with Pinoy. Siguro ang laki ng sweldo." Hindi. Then another person said it must have been a real prestigious job. I guess what I will say about working in government is you have to make a real commitment because it's very demanding. The impact, though, of what you are doing is so significant. It's not just any other job. It's a job where you have to be a little bit more detail oriented and careful more than usual, because in a project you might be able to impact the lives of whatever 500, 1,000, 10,000 people, but in government you impact the lives of all your citizens, of the entire country. Kung minutes lang, di ba, you think, I'm just an EA, I'm just taking minutes. If you get those minutes wrong and, 10 cabinet secretaries read your minutes, and that's what they'll remember. They have 3 meetings in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, three. They have 9 meetings that day. You did the minutes for one. That's what they'll rely on to make their sort of future decisions. So it's very important. Even things that seem quite small or you think menial, they will matter to people who make decisions. So I think for young people who want to join government, I would definitely recommend it, as long as it's a government that you believe in, because government work is extremely exhausting. It's taxing. It's high pressure. What will really motivate you to come to work every day and stick to your job is really to be working with a government that stands up for ideals that you share, and is working towards a goal that you will embrace as your own. My other unforgettable experience, actually, it's good you reminded me. It was to work with a very diverse group of experts that I think I would not have been able to work with otherwise, but also to have had the privilege of working with some extremely committed, extremely hardworking, and extremely bright young people who could have been, developing a social life or going out of town with their friends or doing a lot more fun things than fact checking cabinet secretaries, briefers, and speeches. But they were there, for some stayed for 6 years, but others stayed for less. But they were all equally hardworking and bright. And I run into them these days, and they're doing extremely well in their fields, sort of bolstered by their career in government.
It's so beautiful to hear, ma'am, no? And I love that you emphasize that government work is really work. Kasi some people tend to romanticize it, no? And I guess people nowadays think na, if you know someone in the government, you can easily get in. But it's actually really a job. And you have to stick to it no matter what. And I guess one of the deciding factors too is if you have to really trust the leader or the government that you want to work for. We watched your video or your speech during Pinoy's Week. It was a very heartfelt speech, very beautiful and moving. Many people saw Pinoy's passing as an end of an era. For our generation or the following generations, how do you want him to be remembered?
It took me a long time sort of to summarize in a short, well, it wasn't that short, in short remarks, what we would remember of Pinoy. I guess they would be, one is to really strive for excellence. No matter your audience, they do not deserve less than your best. The second would be, they like to call him hard-headed. What made him hard-headed, I think, was more strength of conviction. He had a very clear idea, for the most part, of what he believed was right and was wrong. And you would not find him going against his own moral compass. A lot of us know what's right and wrong, pero to pick right every time is not easy. I'm sure you all know. Ngayon kasi you have people who have very strong opinions and they're quite inconsiderate of others. Hindi na social faux pas or unacceptable yung maging bastos. If anything, si Pinoy, it was always important to him to treat people with respect. Kahit pagalitan ka niya in public, i-outline kung bakit. Papagalitan ka talaga niya. Pero it was never bastos. You know what I mean? Uncivilized. How to stand your ground without disrespecting others. I think that's something that is not given as much importance as it should these days. The last thing that I would like people to remember about him is he really took a risk by entrusting a significant level of authority to some very young, relatively inexperienced people like me, people in my team, to be able to have honed your skills in that environment, to have been given the opportunity to be in that, to enjoy that level of trust habang bata ka. I think that really shapes the kind of professional you are. Maybe not everyone, will take the lessons of a presidential staffer to heart forever. But I think most of us, that shape the way we conduct ourselves as professionals, even if we're not in government anymore, even if we don't work for the president anymore. It was humbling as it was sort of inspiring.
I guess us also who didn't work in the government but are working in the private sector can also relate. We also think or idealize what kind of boss we want, diba? And you also share that Pinoy was someone who trusted young people and gave them leeway to perform their jobs according to their own abilities. Pinoy is also one, if not the most vilified presidents in recent times. He's been the subject of, fake news and propaganda. Even until now that he's gone, there's still lots of narratives to glorify, for example, the dictatorship. How do you react, ma'am, when you read fake news or you scroll through your news feed, for example, in Facebook? How do you react to that po?
So to be honest, I'm not on Facebook kasi I cannot take it. There are some things that should not even be dignified with your time. But my friends tell me that's not the way you should react because you have to address it, you have to correct it. I'm very happy to help others correct it, but I really don't read any more of the things that I know will just infuriate me. There are some that deserve to be corrected. But I think there are some that are so beneath your time. I see them passed around and then I help correct, things about Yolanda or other things said about Pinoy. If you think of recent news, I think there was a rally in Tarlac where they put was it a tent in front of the statue of Ninoy? I remember looking at it and thinking, if someone had done that to a Marcos statue during the presidency of Pinoy, mapapagalitan siya because that's not how you treat former heads of states, no matter how undeserving they are. And for a person who is considered somewhat of a hero in the Philippines to be treated that way in his hometown just because you can, it's I think a mark of the kind of people that allow this kind of behavior. And see, tayo, we're Filipinos, di ba? When you sit at the table, bawal na kaganyan, di ba? Yung bawal, maraming bawal. Nung bata ako, in church, bawal pa yung naka-de-cuatro kasi it's unbecoming of ladies or something. There are a lot of things that are considered bastos. So I think kung tayo nga ang standards natin sa pagiging bastos ang tataas sa sarili natin, sa anak natin, 'di ba, sa mga pamangkin natin. Siguro naman dapat mas mataas yung standards para sa mga taong gustong mamuno sa atin. So yung mga kaugalian na ganyan, parang sobrang bastos, hindi hindi mo na alam paano mo sasagutin. Siguro dapat ang tamang sagot na lang ay yung sabihin sa kanila na siguro yung ganyan kabastos, hindi na dapat binibigyan ng poder para makita pa ng iba at magaya pa ng iba.
I admire your decision to get out of Facebook. I think that's something that a lot of us could benefit from, having listened to you on that. Also, ma'am, speaking on the changing values of our country since this administration came into power, we've heard several times from the president himself so many misogynistic remarks. And at one time, he even said that the presidency is not a job for women. And I know that you are working as an executive director of the Philippine Business Coalition for Women Empowerment. How do you react, ma'am, to those statements? Is this a symptom of the changing views of our society towards gender equality, would you say?
It's a very large topic that needs to be unpacked. Yan, it's a language of my advocacy, unpacking issues. On the one hand, there are a lot of women in positions of authority in the Philippines. I work with a lot of very talented, very impressive female CEOs, managers. On the one hand, you have that. We have very progressive laws. You know, we have a telecommuting law, which in theory allows women and men to take on some work out of the office to take into consideration, logistical difficulties of going to the office every day. And because that's also an issue for working women, we have the updated Safe Spaces Act, which recognizes that sexual harassment can take place anytime, at any place, and can be done by anyone to anyone. Kasi before, you had to be someone in authority to sexually harass someone lower than you. Someone in authority cannot be harassed by someone who is of lower rank. So that law changed all that. So we have all those progressive policies. However, I think culturally, I think the Philippines is still very much a patriarchy, where women are really still seen to serve only specific roles. You're confined to specific things. Ako, for example, growing up, it was always, oh, you're so opinionated. Or, ano ba yan, bakit ba nagbibilad ka? Ba't ang itim-itim mo? Yung babae dapat maputi. Yung buhok mo, hindi mo papahabain yan. Mukha kang lalaki. Or, ang tapang-tapang mo, kababae mong tao, parang, relax ka lang. Baka gusto mong hinhinanan ko. Or matuto ka nga magluto, paano ka mag-aasawa niyan? Mga ganyan. I grew up, my parents are very progressive. My mom worked all my life. They were sort of equals in their field. Pero syempre, we grew up also with sort of people to help us around the house. If we're all still sleeping and somebody needs to be woken up for something, ako yon. Don't wake up my brothers. You let them sleep. But me and my sister, you can wake me up. It's not because my brothers were particularly sexist. In fact, they are quite progressive as well. But people, there's still that feeling of yung mga lalaki, they should be served. Women, they exist to serve. Even I think if you look at, kasi they say, in the Philippines, yung mga babae, boss na boss. You're the ones who control the household budget. And I always argue with my friends, that's actually not a privilege. It's more of a responsibility kasi most of the time, kulang yung budget na yan. And nobody wants to deal with the pressure of deciding what gets cut out of your list of priorities. So, bibigay mo sa babae in the household. Ayan. Pagkasyahin mo yun. This is what we need to spend on. Bahala ka na. It's emotional labor. It's mental stress. And in the end, di ba? Kung hindi magkasya yan, you're the one who needs to take on extra work. Tatahi ka ng kortina, maglalaba ka, you take on an extra project, rarakit ka, kasi what you have is not enough. Meron nga silang term, di ba, ina ng laging saklolo. Yan, that's what women are. You're expected to be a problem solver. You're expected to be there in crisis situations. Pero for some reason, and Erwin, the answer to this question, your guess is as good as mine. But to actually accept the authority of females, people are still squeamish about accepting females as leaders. For yung takbuhan, di ba? Iiyakan mo, okay, yes. Pero in a playing field where there are men and women, even women themselves, mapapaisip to pick the female. And I think that's really something we need to address from schools, even with our little girls. They're for class president. They're not for class secretary la, treasurer, taga-notes, di ba? In group work, di ba? Girls, usually, asa na yung girl? Kayo mag-notes. Tapos magpe-present lalaki. Out of instinct, that's something that needs to be changed because women can be out there as well. It's not unbecoming of women to be in positions of power. If they can decide how to allocate household budget, imagine what they can do with power.
It's such a strong statement, ma'am, and I love your explanation. And I guess many of our audience will also get to think about their inherent biases and the microaggressions that they face on a daily basis. We've talked about the contradictions in our society because even though we've had these progressive laws, there's still societal issues that need to be addressed. And I guess it's very apparent, ma'am, no, in the current campaign season. We have a lone woman presidential candidate who's been at the receiving end of so many misogynistic remarks. Lutang or babae kasi kaya hindi pwede magpresidente, even considering the fact that we've already had two female presidents. How do you react when you hear those misogynistic remarks thrown at VP Lenny? And do you think these remarks are hurting her chances to be our next president?
Yung lutang is so ironic because I don't think there is a presidential candidate that has been more present in any conversation, in any activity, in any crisis, or in any debate, present literally and figuratively, than Vice President Robredo. So I think it's an outright lie, and it's a remark that tries to feed in, as I told you, the inherent bias against women. Kung masyadong magaling, mayabang. Kung mag-hesitate, sabi ko na nga ba, babae. 'Di ba? It's unfortunate that people react that way. But I also think it's extremely admirable the way that the vice president has responded to remarks, 'di ba? Hindi siya natitinag. And she does it with grace. I told you earlier, I don't engage people who I feel are not worth engaging, or I don't go on Facebook kasi my reaction would be quite, I they always say you should take the high road, pero minsan kasi sarap pumatol, and that's really not helpful at this point in time. And it's very impressive. I think, the vice president has responded with grace every single time, and really more than grace, with action. I was able to experience one day on the campaign trail with her. Totoo talaga yung 18 hours. And at the end of the day, pagod na ako. But the next day, she, got up and did it again. Ako, umuwi na ako. She got up and did it again. And she's been doing it for the last, how many weeks. People always ask me, when I go out and I talk to people that I would interact with on a regular basis, bakit gustong-gusto niyo si VP Lenny? Sabi ko kasi daming problema ng Pilipinas, siguro hindi yun mare-resolve kung hindi kasing sipag mo. Kasi masisipag ang Pilipino 'di ba? Kung yung leader natin hindi kasing sipag mo, ano na lang mangyayari? And I have to say, wala pa ako nakitang kandidatong kasing sipag ni Vice President Robredo. In terms of showing up on the campaign trail, but also in terms of knowing her stuff, I think she is a knowledgeable and hardworking candidate. And I think that's something that is of her nature, not so much as something that developed as a result of her running for president, which makes it all the more, I think, impressive.
We know VP Lenny is extremely qualified. I personally believe she's the most qualified of all the presidential candidates by a mile. Why do you think it's not translating into actual survey numbers? And do you think if she was able to address those fake news or criticisms, unfair criticisms, hurled at her the past 6 years, do you think it could have been mitigated or lessened?
The question of surveys is also something I ask myself because I've been in a couple of her rallies, and what I do is I try and stay in the periphery para makita ko kung ano yung crowd, just to get a sense. They're always huge, like huge. And they are people who, they're not bussed in by the mayor or some barangay captain or some supporter. Talagang they will go there on their own. Nagtatawagan sila, magbabarkada, magkakamag-anak. They go on their own, they find their own ways to attend. And they stay, alam mo, ang init-init. They really stay until she comes and stay. So, the crowds that I have seen are extremely committed. Pero siguro, ang labanan, as they said, is not so much in those big rallies, pero talagang house to house and by conversations. Kasi if you ask daw mga supporters of other popular presidential candidates, you ask them, why do you like so and so? Basta, gusto ko siya eh. Parang just respect my opinion is that's what they say daw. There's not a list of qualifications they can point to or anything. It's really maybe perception and the lack of engagement that has resulted in those preliminary numbers for now. But I do think that if people continue to go out and talk to somebody new every day, if the enthusiasm that we've seen in the crowds that have come out for the vice president translate into, day to day, house to house, person to person, friend to friend, family member to family member campaigning, that will change.
We have to emphasize the fact that we have to double our efforts in talking to people face to face, going out of our comfort zones. Our second to the last question. Fake news and disinformation have played a very significant role in determining the results of the past elections. Do you think, ma'am, there is an information crisis, as they would say in the Philippines? I don't know if you touch on this in your work in public policy, no? But how do you think the government should address this issue? Do you think we should have a law against fake news?
I don't think that's really something for the government to address, especially if it's a government that might play a part in the creation of fake news. I don't think it's something that can be resolved through regulation. That's to be sure. Also, given, as I said before, there are tons of policies in the Philippines that have excellent objectives, but the real challenge is in implementation. So I think in terms of fake news, yes, there's a crisis of information. You're right. But bigger than that is the crisis of education. Because the ability to discern fake news from fact is really related to low comprehension, to a lack of critical thinking skills. It's also in the way we teach, di ba? Siguro younger people, well, my daughter, younger people are more empowered these days to question authority. Pero kami, when I was younger, which was a long time ago, the way you conduct yourself in a classroom is really you submit to the figure of authority, you listen, you take notes. When they give you a quiz, you answer. You don't debate with your teacher. You don't ask questions to sort of challenge the way they present things. Later on, I went to masters outside the country. It was really hard to get into the habit because my foreign classmates talagang every 5 minutes, I have an objection to what you have to say. And here that's perceived as rude. How funny our perception of rude. We have to remove the tendency to demand instant respect for figures of authority, but rather translate that respect into the way we conduct ourselves with others, regardless of their stature in life. I think when we teach our students, it's not to memorize things, and sometimes you ask them pa to memorize the wrong things, which makes, it compounds it. But really to think critically when you are taught something, what you do with that piece of information, how does that relate to other pieces of information that you have been given? So it's not really a question of what government should do, but it's really a question of what families should do and what schools should do. In this election, families and schools will play a big role in shaping the outcome. But I think even after these elections, schools have a big role in shaping the way we remember our history, whether we will remember it as what really happened, or we will have a sort of disfigured history where parts of it are manufactured and critical parts of it are just omitted. That will be up to our schools. And whether or not, our children will be taught how to think critically, how to question information that they are given and not just accept. That's really a question for our schools, for our teachers, and for our parents.
Couldn't agree more, ma'am. And I love that you emphasize that it is a shared responsibility between families and schools. And I also agree with you, the educational system really in the Philippines, students really are taught to obey blindly without questioning authority. I can relate to that. During this pandemic din, di ba, the school somehow medyo nag-stagnate yung quality of teaching din. So that's also one of the issues, especially now that we're kind of going back to face-to-face classes and all that. So ma'am, for our last question, I know we've touched on this throughout this whole podcast interview. And you yourself are a working single mother. Bakit po sa darating na eleksyon, bakit ilaw ng tahanan na magbibigay ng tanglaw sa ating bayan?
Siguro, marami nang nasabi tungkol sa kakayahan ni VP Lenny, sa track record niya bilang abogado, bilang congresswoman, bilang vice president, kung gaano siya kalapit sa mga nasa laylayan. Nung abogado pa siya, nung nagsisilbi yung asawa niya sa Naga, nung naging congresswoman siya, and even nung vice president siya. Kung ano ang kaya niyang gawin, we talked about this earlier, sa maliit na budget ng Office of the Vice President, kaya niyang pagkasyahin sa maraming programa na nakakatulong sa maraming mahihirap na tao at komunidad. Narinig na rin natin siguro kung gaano siya kasipag. Basta may emergency, may crisis, may sakuna, nandyan siya. Hindi nag-uutos, hindi para tignan lang kung ano ang nangyari. Kung hindi, nandoon, nagtatanong kung anong kailangan at nagtatrabaho para madala kung ano yung kinakailangan na yun doon sa mga nangangailangan. Ang isang pinuno, ang kinalakihan ko kasi na definition ng leader ay hindi ang pinuno na pinagsisilbihan, kung hindi ang pinuno na nangunguna at nagsisilbi. At yung klase ng tao na yon, nangunguna sa pagtataya, commitment. Siguro sa kampanyang ito, marami na sa atin ang nagtaya. In fact, it's one of the may kilabot realizations. If you look at the rallies, there are so many people that were not political before. Hindi naman sila active sa political discussions before, pero makikita mo dinadala nila yung asawa nila, anak nila, kahit hindi pa botante. Nagtataya. And marami tayong, they take time from work, gumagastos sila ng sarili nilang allowance, sweldo, para ikampanya si Vice President. Pero si VP, kahit maraming nagtataya para sa kanya, I think masasabi natin na ang pinakamalaking itinaya sa laban ng laban na ito ay walang iba na kung hindi si Vice President Robredo. Makikita mo yon sa kasipagan niya, makikita mo yon sa paraan ng pananalita niya, na siya talaga yung, kung laban ito, siya talaga yung nangunguna. Pero tinatanggap din niya na hindi siya magtatagumpay. Kinikilala rin niya ang pagtataya ng iba. So I think yun ang malaking bagay. Kung ikaw mismo hindi mo kayang tumaya sa laban, hindi ka dapat kasama siguro sa pinagpipilian. And no question about it. There's nobody more committed in this presidential fight than the Vice President herself.
Napakaganda po ng sinabi nyo at sana magtuloy-tuloy yung momentum, no? At sana pagdating po ng araw ng eleksyon, gagaya na po sinasabi ni VP Lenny, na the last man standing will be a woman. And having said that, maraming salamat po, Ms. Julia Abad. Maraming salamat po sa oras nyo.
Thank you, Erwin.